right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another edition of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. And joining me today is my lovely partner and co-host, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome to the program. You don't sound like AI at all.
No, I don't.
We were just listening to some terrible videos on some of the topics we're going to be discussing today, generated by AI, and it is horrible. Well,
then, it is AI, but also the content was directed by a human, and I have to say the content was pretty terrible too. The dialogue was bad, the content was bad.
Yeah. So we're going to be discussing an ongoing scientific investigation that we've covered here on the show. And so this is like we first announced the discovery a few years ago, and we talked about white footprints in white sands that had been discovered that were being dated to like 23,000, 24,000 years ago. They did some follow-up research. They honed the data into 22,000 maybe a year and a half ago. I think that paper came out. And then recently a new paper came out. They apparently have lots of groups of different scientists now in this region investigating these footprints. And what they found appeared to be these drag marks that are in association with footprints that very well may represent the earliest known form of transport ever discovered.
Right.
What were your thoughts when I sent you the paper?
Well, it's saying something is earliest known in this regard is a little, it's like anything that you would have used for transport is going to be made of wood, and so it's going to
You're breaking up really bad. There's lots of glitching and twitching on your end, so I don't know what's going on there. Maybe you just want to turn off your camera because you're still not back.
Earliest known doesn't necessarily mean
so you were gone
much.
for like a minute. Maybe you want to turn off your camera.
Yeah,
you're gone again.
I'm gone again? I can hear you.
Yeah, well, you just froze up when you turned your camera off.
Okay.
All right. So
Should I repeat what I said?
No.
I was just saying that because anything of this nature that we used to pull things around is going to be made of wood, and so it's going to disappear pretty readily. And so there could be a lot of things that we've missed, that we just don't know about. The only reason we know about this is because we have the artifact of the tracks in the sediment.
Yeah, and there's pretty good evidence, and we'll dive into this, that these ruts were as a result of something that is still in use today called a travois.
Mm-hmm.
Or a sledge. A simple sledge is like a sled is where you get one or two sticks, tie something to it, and you drag it behind you at a very steep angle, which makes it pretty easy to do.
Well, and because you don't have all of the surface area of a sled creating friction and making it difficult to get over rocks or whatever, this is very practical.
Yeah, and once you get one of these travois moving, it's easy to stay moving with it. It's the law of friction.
Mm-hmm.
And so archaeologists are now claiming that they have found the world's oldest handcart. Now, just like you were probably alluding to, Leah, when we lost you, these handcarts, someone had to discover them. They had to figure out and engineer the best way to make them. And so this information then had to be passed on through generations or from community to community. So based on the number of drag marks and the different types of drag marks in white sands, clearly there were a whole bunch of different types of travois being used, and they were moving food or something in this area because maybe they were harvesting wood or harvesting some wild edible. Who knows? But these carts clearly, if they are 22,000 years ago, these cart marks, they had to come from a time earlier.
I mean, obviously this is very practical too if you're at all a migratory population. We like to talk about how amazing it was that the wheel was first invented, quote unquote, invented in 2500 BC. And I've said many times on this show that I find that to be kind of a silly conversation to have. Like, it's really no great intellectual leap to discover that things that are round roll and that might have be of some utility. However, a wheel requires some kind of manufacture. So if you're a migratory population, are you going to manufacture wheels that you're going to then bring around with you everywhere? I don't know. This seems a lot simpler because anywhere you go, you're going to be grabbing wood for tent poles or spears or whatever. That material is readily available. So this is very quick and easy and very logical and kind of innate to do this. Like, people talk about this as if it's some like amazing intellectual creation, and it's like, actually it's pretty, sure, is it resourceful? Of course, but human beings are resourceful, and I don't think it's really that spectacular. Do you?
No, and it's very practical, these devices, because like you said, let's say you're going on a long distance journey, or you're migrating, or you're moving to a new place, or going to visit a different village. Who knows? When you get there, you have wood with you. So
Right.
you can use it for your new house, you can use it for your first fire, or you can save it for your second leg of your trip. It's
Well,
a
and even if
very,
you don't have it with you, it's pretty easy to come by, you know?
yeah, as long as you're near somewhere where there's wood.
Right.
And this area of White Sands, there are no trees and there is
Yeah.
no wood. So they
Yeah.
had to get this from probably near Ruidoso, like up in the mountains,
Yeah. Yeah.
which isn't far away. It's just like 15 miles.
Right.
And they're down here on the alkali flats. I would imagine they're collecting and drying fish and then bringing it back home. So they're staying here and camping along the edge of this water. It's a very dangerous place. And let's jump into the paper here. Before we do, we're going to show you a picture here of one of those drag marks in association with footprints. And the footprints are so well preserved, it's kind of eerie, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's weird how too in this image, they have this appearance of being.
All right, you just cut out. Leah was saying they have the appearance of being something. So we'll wait for her to.
Back.
Yeah, here you are. They have the appearance of being what?
I was just saying they sort of had the appearance of being concave instead of convex, or maybe I have those reversed. I always get those mixed up. It's just kind of, they look raised rather than depressed in this image, so it's kind of funny too.
They look depressed to me in this image rather than raised.
That's funny.
What's interesting is that there are actually 3 types of fossil footprints. There are impressions.
Yeah.
There are, I believe, cast and die, where you fill in the impression and the only thing left is the fill in. And then there are the reverse, the convex ones. An easy way to remember concave and convex is a cave is a hole, and concave means a hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
convex is a mountain.
I'll still get it mixed up.
Concave is a valley.
I have the same problem with the word viscous. It always sounds like it means the opposite to me.
Yeah. So the paper is the Ichnology of White Sands, New Mexico, linear traces and human footprints, evidence of transport technology. And it's a really easy paper to read. It's got some big words, but you can just look up the definition and easily get through this paper. There's not a lot, there's no math. It's not like your typical scientific paper.
It's largely a description of what they found, plus analysis of, their how they determined that these marks were created by sticks rather than something else.
And this is a great scientific paper for a number of reasons, because they actually do good science. And so rather than just hypothesizing about these drag marks or something like that, they go out and they try to replicate them using a number of different methodologies. And we'll get to that at the end. But I found that to be quite refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
So the location of White Sands, if you didn't know, is like central southwest New Mexico. Like we said, it's near Ruidoso. That would be directly to the west of White Sands and up in the mountains. And this is one of the lowest areas in the entire state, except for the southern portion of the state, which goes out into Mexico there. It's mostly military owned, so it's hard to get access to a lot of these locations where the footprints have been found. But according to the paper, or maybe an article I read, if you're a scientist or an interested group that wants to see them and you contact the National Park Service or whoever runs this portion of White Sands, they will get you access. That's pretty nice.
Indeed.
So here it says the footprints at White Sands are of three broad types. They're either dolomite cemented pedestals, which you were describing, which is epi-relief, meaning they're like reverse tracks sticking up, or a cemented track with a combination of positive and negative relief, which they refer to as epi-relief and hypo-relief, and simple negative impressions in consolidated, although largely uncemented sediment with sediment fill, which would be a normal footprint if you're walking on a wet sandy beach.
Right.
It says, although linear features are found in association with all three track types, only tracks in hyporelief can be excavated.
Mm.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know. I was just wondering that because if the epi-relief tracks, for example, are cemented, then shouldn't you be able to excavate them?
Yeah, I would think. But here's a good thing we can look at. Let me blow up this picture. This is how they excavate the tracks. So do you see this arrow where it says the eroded edge?
Yeah.
Everything behind that is what they call slope material, which down here is the purple.
Mm-hmm.
And TH2 here is a surface that they've revealed. Here is the surface, so they remove the purple, and then and you've got the surface with the tracks, and that's this surface here. This is unconsolidated, like wind-blown debris for the last 20,000 years. But it's only the hyporelief that are probably hard enough that they can do this, or that particular type of trackway is the only one that is on this type of ledge. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Again, if the epi-relief prints are cemented, then I don't see why you can't just brush away the loose material.
Right, and follow the tracks. But apparently the extended trackways are only that one type, because they would be excavating the other ones if they could. So it's quite interesting. I'm going to show, before we get into it, let's just go over, I think this is pretty important, what we know about travois, or travail, or travous, or travois. There's lots of ways to say it. It's a simple A-frame structure that was used to drag loads over land. And what's interesting is that it's most noted in the Plains Indians. Here's a good picture. See this cage with kids in the back?
Yeah.
That's kind of funny.
I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought I saw something about the native people of Siberia using travois like this. Maybe I'm misremembering, but
yeah, these are used worldwide.
Yeah.
But when the first white man came here, this was a common use, not with horses. Obviously, that didn't come until like the 1600s. But I bet you they were using sledges with horses during the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And they're still used today. Here's a guy that made one for his kid to drag him around the beach.
Yeah, and especially in an environment like that, like a wet sandy beach or a lake bed or something. I mean, like I said earlier, I think you could use this pretty much anywhere simply because your point of contact is just one or two sticks.
And notice the Plains Indians are out on these wide open plains where there aren't a lot of big rocks or anything really to get in the way. So it's easy to drag. There were no shocks. So it was probably a pretty bumpy ride.
Yeah.
For the kids.
Yeah.
Now, here are some examples of those trackways. I find this one the most fascinating because it's got that double trackway, which you would expect from a larger travois. And they describe the largest separation as 35 centimeters, which is about the length of your forearm. So these sticks are pretty close together. They're not far apart. And they would be the end portion that was crossed. Let me see this original picture here. Here you can see an example. The lower one has that double cross sledge. So you would get two sticks instead of one. You're either, the majority are single drag marks, but there are some that are doubled, like this one. And because they are parallel, meaning this equidistant, it must be a travois. Do you agree? Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think they've nailed this one on the head as far as what they have discovered.
Well, I also appreciate that, they looked at things like how did the tracks sort of deform the sediment layers underneath, or where you would see kind of like a jumping or skipping because of friction or whatever, and sort of use those things to analyze and say, well, it couldn't really be anything else.
Yeah, let me get to some of that where they show the bioturbation. Yeah, they did such a thorough job on, because these grooves are they're not very homogeneous. You could see just from these pictures, they vary in thickness and size. And you can imagine if you have one of these travois with some weight on it, you're going to take a few steps, stop. Maybe you got a kid with you and you need to do something with him. So they are going to be quite irregular.
Well, and if you hit a rock or something, that's going to change things.
And here is that cross section here where they're looking at deformation occurring due to the weight from the sledge or the travois displacing the sediment. And the footprints don't do that because they're not as heavy and not as destructive as would the end of a sledge be. So all that weight, it's basic physics. All that weight's going to be on that fulcrum, the points, the 2 points or the single point on the travois.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of really good evidence. It's a thorough paper, and I think we should continue with, there's so much discussion on the different types of tracks. Very thorough.
Yeah.
Now, out of the three types of linear features they describe, they have the following general characteristics. They all show evidence of movement across the surface, consistent with a circular stick or pole made of wood, which is probably what they were using. These indenters could hypothetically be made of bone. It's difficult to envision animal bones of appropriate weight, length, and width that could move across the surface in this way. You'd need like an 8-foot bone that doesn't exist. That's kind of funny. They do cover all their tracks here. And they do mention mammoth tusks because those are big. Oh, I must have lost you.
Yeah, I disappeared for a minute there.
Okay, what were you saying?
I wasn't saying anything. I couldn't even hear what you were saying.
We were discussing that these are probably not bones.
Yeah.
The only bone could be a mammoth tusk, and those would be ridiculously heavy and unwieldy, plus they're curved.
Right. Well, and any bone is kind of, somewhat irregular in that sense, right? You're going to have if it's a leg or an arm bone, it's going to have lumps on the end. That's going to make it difficult to drag. So wood really makes the most sense.
Yeah, and these are probably well-engineered travois because they've been handed down through generations, the techniques, and they knew what they were doing. Now, in order to do good science here, they have to throw out all possible explanations to come up with their final conclusion that it's a sled. And the possible explanations they threw out there were 4 broad categories. Non-human animals, flotsam, I love that word, because it's not jetsam. Boat-related keel marks. I was unaware of any ships around 22,000 years ago, but they threw that in there because it is a possibility.
Right.
Firewood. Of course, people drag huge trees all together to bring it to the source. They don't, in the olden days, you didn't chop up the wood and bring one piece at a time. You drug the whole tree with you. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but there's also a whole discussion in this paper about exactly different methods of collecting firewood in different cultures across the globe, right? Like that in some cultures you have women and children who are collecting firewood and they are breaking it up into pieces because they're carrying it in baskets, for example.
Or bundles, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But what's I found interesting about that analysis of all the different firewoods was some of the research coming out from Chaco Canyon. There were hundreds of thousands of timbers brought up to 70 miles away to Chaco. Right. Yeah. And not a single one of them had any evidence of ever being drug.
Yep.
So that was like,
Well, then you have to have multiple men, let's say, carrying one trunk, right?
Yeah, it would be shouldered, I would think.
Right.
And that might be the purpose of the Chaco roads, so you can follow the road easily and just focus on carrying your load.
Yeah.
So the 5th one, and which is interesting, they have 5 here on the bullet list, and they say 4 broad categories. I don't get that. So the 5th one is human transport technology, which they conclude in the end that that's probably it.
Right.
So starting with non-humans and animals, they say that elephants and presumably mammoths and mastodons can drag large branches and tree trunks for miles. They are known to create a range of drag marks with their trunks as well. And this area was a hotbed for mammoths. In fact, this region where these drag marks are is referred to as the Mammoth Trample Site. So it's probably not a really good place to be doing anything.
Yeah.
And which is why you might need a sledge so you can rapidly move through the area with your stuff.
Right.
Now, I didn't find any information on how fast they were dragging these. Did you?
No.
Yeah. So maybe that's the next paper. And we'll find out that they were running with the sledges.
Right. But also, I mean, as they seem to be trying to eliminate the idea of mammoths having some role in the creation of these tracks. I mean, I guess you would have to, if they ever were involved, they would have to be like domesticated mammoths. So that seems kind of silly, just based on the sort of the generally straight lines of these drag marks.
Yeah, and modern beavers as well, they considered, because they can drag wood, and we're talking about a wetland here. And the giant North American Pleistocene beaver, do you know he's like 6 feet long?
No, I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. That would have been a terrible beaver encounter.
You know that beaver skull that I found last year?
Yeah.
I mean, that the tooth on that thing, the orange tooth, is just like insane. So imagine a beaver with big giant like squared off tooth like that. That's terrifying.
Yeah, they'd be like 8 inches wide, their teeth.
Yeah.
So they discount everything for a number of reasons. First of all, that none of these animal footprints are in association with the drag marks. It's human footprints.
Right.
But they did have to do their cursory review of all these things to have a solid scientific foundation, which I think this paper delivers.
Yeah. It's almost a little bit annoyingly over thorough, isn't it?
Yes, but
but it's good.
How many scientists are on the? Yeah, so there's a bunch of people working on this. That's why each one had a chapter, you know. Look, there's like a dozen people working on this.
Well,
which
it's
is what
also just refreshing to have a group of people making sure that they've not left any holes. There's no holes that they haven't considered.
there is the one hole of dating, and that's really blown up in the
Yeah.
last 6 months.
Yeah.
So I think that will all be worked out in a year. And I'm pretty sure we're going to find out that the dating of 22,000 is spot on. We've got a
Well, I mean,
next, but
isn't part of the dating based on finding the prints uh of now extinct animals at similar strata? Isn't that part of the picture here?
yeah, so they could be 13,000 instead of 22 is what people are
Right, right,
arguing.
right. Right.
And they're also arguing this is a windy area and there could be lots of things blowing in and making the date incorrect.
Right, as if like there's more sediment than there would normally be in a less windy place.
Let's say 13,000 years ago, a windstorm occurred and it ripped off some 23,000-year-old sediments from one side of the playa and put it right on that 13,000-year layer where you're walking.
Right, right.
Yeah. But that's just because scientists are butthurt that it's the Clovis first hypothesis is being dismantled.
Right.
And that's, you always get that. We've got a site in Mexico that they're studying now called the Chilahuite Cave, where there's occupation that goes back 30,000 years, human occupation. These are the same people walking in white sands.
Right. Well, and this whole argument and butthurtness about the dates of the quote unquote first humans in North America and South America, whatever. I find this whole thing really stupid because it includes a very basic assumption that you shouldn't make, and the assumption is that there was a time when humans existed elsewhere in the globe but didn't exist in North and South America. And there's really no reason to think that that's the case. There's no reason why we can't say human beings have been in North and South America as long as they've been in other parts of the globe. Unless, of course, you're completely married to like a theory like the out of Africa theory.
Yeah, but even that theory places the first hominids millions of years ago, which means they would have millions of years to get to North America, and they should be there.
Right. It's just such a dumb assumption. It's so this whole argument around this is really stupid, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think they really should do a study on these different foot sizes to determine like who is here. Is this footprint up top the dad, and that this is the mom, and this is the little kid over here?
Well, they do seem in this paper to indicate clearly that it is obvious that in many cases, like especially the footprints like along the side of the tracks are clearly children.
Which is interesting because travois are now used by natives for children.
Yeah. But if you've got like, 10 children or something, you're not going to drag them all. If they're 8 years old, you're going to make them walk. Plus, you're going to make them carry stuff too, right? They're going to take part in the chores of survival. So,
yeah, these people had their small children. You can see in this picture in the cage.
Right.
So the little ones that wander away and tend to get eaten by giant 6-foot beavers are in the cage. And the ones that can run, like the 6 and 8-year-olds, they walk on the side of the travois.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is really, I mean, it's funny, but it's also really smart, right? We talk about, here in the South San Juan Mountains, if you go hiking and you have a small child or a dog with you, you keep them close by because that small animal or child is the first target of a mountain lion. So same concept here.
Yeah, they're going to get picked off.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the interpretation, because what we want to do is then I want to transition this into the discovery of the wheel, which you put at 2500 BC when in fact it's much earlier. But we'll get into
then
that.
There's clearly disagreement in the field about when that happened.
Yeah, and we'll get into that at the end here. So based on the review of possible interpretations, they discount the formation of the structures by mammoths, giant sloth, or any other animal. One cannot discount the possibility that some of the features described from White Sands are the result of just dragging sticks, poles, spears, or firewood. However, this does not explain all the features. I love this in the conclusion. because when they did the physical science and they went out and they made sledges and they drug wood and they did all this, they were able to recreate the different types of drag marks, which showed them that there were different things actually going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you find that interesting?
Yeah, indeed.
They're not just, yeah, and think about it. So this ancient culture that does have these travois, they also have spears and other things they're probably doing.
Yeah.
And what's even crazier is even if they had the wheel here, it would be useless in this location.
Yeah. Yes.
Did you ever
that's
try
my
to drive
point.
a bike on a beach?
I mean, that's my whole point about, and we'll get to this obviously, about the quote unquote invention of the wheel. Like, I don't think that the wheel is such a hard thing to conceptualize, but obviously in an environment like this, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this paper that, our appreciation of its thoroughness and kind of analyzing all of the ways in which these tracks were made, it makes me think back to, you remember what are they called? Like the so-called wagon tracks? What is it?
Cart ruts.
The what?
It's cart ruts, and we used to
Cart.
scream, wagon wheels.
Right. Where, they assume that these quote unquote tracks in stone, this is in New Mexico, right? I can't remember exactly where that is.
Here's an
They
example.
assume.
The type example is in Malta, of all places.
But didn't we go somewhere where we went somewhere in New Mexico where these are claimed to exist?
We found them in Utah.
Was it Utah?
Yeah, we found them in Utah. We've seen them in Arizona, and we've seen them in New Mexico.
And, the assumption here is that these are made by wagon wheels. But there's no analysis of it. And from what we could tell, it seemed like the most likely explanation for this was like a purposely carved out channel for managing water.
Yeah, but in some cases, in the place we saw them in Utah, they were equidistant every time we saw them. So they were definitely for moving stuff.
Yeah. Well, and then, which means that we should have also considered the use of travois.
Yeah, and the reason these are eroded is because it's soft sediment when you find these cart ruts.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, if you were dragging a sledge, they would eventually make ruts.
Yeah.
And then you would drag it in the same rut to make it easier to drag.
Right.
So that's what could be going on there.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that as soon as we finish up here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these drag marks are from different things. One of them consists of two parallel equidistant grooves. And while does resemble some of the narrower type features, they would expect examples with multiple parallel grooves in dragged firewood was the cause. Interesting.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So the ends of the logs were not always provided with just two branches or stubs, and they would expect, therefore, to see examples of three or more, and they don't observe this. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Hypothetically, the features could be formed by a boat's keel. However, their distribution at White Sands and the nature of reed boats at the time makes the explanation unlikely, because I don't think reed boats probably had a keel.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they favor some form of hand-drawn travois as the most parsimonious. That's a great word. Parsimonious explanation.
It's actually parsimonious.
Oh yeah? What does that even mean?
I forget.
It's parsimonious.
Let me look it up really quick.
It is unwilling to spend money or use resources, stingy or frugal. So it's the stingiest explanation.
Yeah.
It's the stingiest explanation for some of the features described. That's what they say. It's worth noting that linear features occur near each other and are often iso-oriented. This suggests that a similar path was followed when traveling back and forth, and that several individuals were moving at the same time, as in transport carried in a small working group.
Mm-hmm.
In this sense, an indication of the direction of travel may, when mapped over a large area, indicate potential routeways. Well, this all makes sense. We're back at the end of the Ice Age, near maximum glaciation of the Wisconsinian. So this is the coldest time on Earth ever. And these people are obviously in the warmest spot they could be, which is a pretty warm spot today. So, but they are threatened by all these giant Ice Age megafaunas. So there's no way you're going to carry a sled across a giant open alkali flat alone.
Yes.
Yeah. So there.
Well, and other ways in which this all kinds of fits together, right? You know, they talk about never finding a track of, let's say, 3 sticks. It's maximum 2. And in one respect, that makes sense too, right? Because you're going to have less friction that way. And then you might say, well, what if you wanted to carry a heavier load? You might need the 3rd stick. But at that point, that load might be too heavy for let's say a man to manage. So then that also makes sense to why you would have groups of people working together for, let's say collecting some material for a purpose or something like that. But also protection, as you point out.
Yeah, and there would be, if you were a native, you wouldn't be in an area you wouldn't have to be. So they have to be here for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though there's giant mammoths that could trample them.
Right.
But just like in nature, I mean, most animals run away from you. It's very infrequent that an animal will approach a human in any circumstance. So I'm sure, even though there were lots of giant animals back then, it's only the predators that were eating people or a real danger.
Or if you're, running into a mama with babies, right?
Yeah.
That's always a danger.
Then you're done, especially if it's a cave bear. They're like twice as big as grizzlies.
Yeah. Oh, I will say though, there would be an exception for something like a polar bear, right? Like polar bears actually actively hunt human beings and can smell them from miles away because they don't care. They just want to eat something.
Yeah, anything that's an apex predator will eat anything.
Yeah.
and there were saber-tooths out here. So it was a rough life. In order to get to 30 years old, I think it was very difficult 22,000 years ago. Which is why there's so many babies and travois and cages of kids, because you need to keep making babies because they keep getting eaten.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier too, just about being a relatively migratory human being and, thinking about how terrifying that would be if you were to seriously get hurt and be unable to walk, right? You're really screwed at that point. Or if you're elderly, but I think the reality is just there's probably not a lot of elderly people. And unfortunately, with a serious injury, you're just probably going to be left behind or maybe dragged on a travois, if there's a chance for you to recover.
Yeah, hopefully there's someone strong enough to drag you. Right. I imagine that is a huge liability. Dragging an injured person, if they're bleeding, let's say, that scent gets out, and then you are a target.
Well, and it's obviously not easy to do either, right? Like I was listening to a guy talking about having to carry one of his, this is a military guy in a war zone, having to carry one of his buddies out of a dangerous area who was, too injured to walk, and how it made him feel like he had never worked out a day in his life. Like that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very taxing. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying too about, probably you don't have a 3-stick travois, because there's too much friction. And at that point, the need for 3 sticks is probably going to mean too much weight, which is really going to slow you down, which in this environment might be tremendously dangerous.
Absolutely. And they do have spears, because I think that the conclusion here at the end is that a lot of these drag marks are their spears. It says, while some of the simpler traces may be formed by the movement of firewood or simply the idle dragging of spears or tent poles, I think they're most likely spears, which then when you get to a safe location, you could use as a tent pole.
Right. Well, and then you wonder too, like these sticks may have been multi-purpose, right? And if you can use your tent pole as both part of a travois and a tent pole, I mean, that's brilliant. You limits the amount of stuff you have to carry, and
yeah, you don't need extra sticks.
Right.
They suggest that those that involve the movement of two parallel grooves, like we showed you, are likely produced by an improvised travois dragged by people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is these prints here.
And again, to treat this as if it's some extraordinary novelty because this is from people from 22,000 years ago, I think is really insulting to the people of 22,000 years ago. This constant assumption that people were really stupid, thousands of years ago. There's no reason to make that assumption. I think we just do it to make ourselves feel good or something. So when I hear people
of course, you cut out at the juicy spot, but how dare they allow people to drag stuff on sticks? I mean, that's what it comes down to. We're just
life easier. It's not that remarkable.
Okay, you just came back.
Damn. I mean, I was just saying that I know you heard me say that it's insulting to the people of 22,000 years ago, but it's like, imagine yourself in being part of a migratory population where you have very few possessions and you're not carrying much with you. You're going to come up with things on the fly based on the materials that are around you that are going to make your life easier. We all do that. There's no reason to assume that we were so stupid 22,000 years ago that it was some mark of genius that someone came up with a travois.
Yeah.
I think that's also evidenced by the fact that you do find this, let's call it a technology globally, right? Because we're pretty sure that there are periods of time where human beings were not interacting, different groups of human beings were not interacting with each other that much. And so it's not really a stretch either to find that different groups of people would have come up with something like this on their own.
I'm pretty sure early hominids, including Denisovans, Neanderthals, and even earlier hominids, I'm pretty sure used a version of the travois for all sorts of things.
Right. And if you think about the materials that might have been available to you in the natural world, like sticks of wood are really the only thing that I can think of that would allow you to do something like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's simple math.
Yes.
So we've been doing this forever. Now the question is, when did we finally need the wheel? Well, I think you need the wheel when you start transporting extremely large loads that you need, a single human can only drag so much on a travois. What if I want to move 80 times that and be
right.
more
Well, now
efficient?
You're going to use a horse,
yeah,
and a cart.
And so here we have, they're claiming the first wheel 60 to 100 years ago was used to throw pots in Mesopotamia. So they weren't using it for vehicles. They had it on end and it was spinning to throw pottery.
Because I'm sure they never witnessed anything spinning in nature or anything round that rolled. I'm sure it was a stroke of genius that somebody came up with this at 4200 BC. Obviously, I'm being very facetious here.
Yeah, the potter's wheel came first, and then it took 700 years for someone to figure out they could put it on its side and make a wagon. It took 700 years of them making pots until someone said, wait a minute. If we just get a couple of these, we can make a wheelbarrow.
I mean, of course, they never consider what it is that we haven't uncovered and which things might have decomposed so that we will never find them. Instead, they're like, oh, look, we're so stupid. It took us 700 years to figure out how to apply this to a vehicle.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's not the first wheeled vehicles. It's just the first wheeled vehicles that we're aware of.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the people that built Göbekli Tepe had some things that they knew about, like the wheel.
Right. But again, I do think that the wheel, like you said, I think it's probably both triggered by the need to carry heavier loads, but because of that, also it's an indication of civilizations that are more settled, right? Like, I don't think you need to necessarily need to carry huge, heavy loads if you're a migratory population. But if you're settled and you're manufacturing things, that's when you really start to need stuff like this.
Right. Once you have too many people and and they're not doing anything and you get fat and lazy things called towns, you got to start bringing in and out a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
Like if you get 1,000 people in one spot, you've got to get rid of all their poop and everything else. You're not, that stuff builds up.
Yeah. Well, it's the difference between going and to get all of your resources versus having the resources brought to you.
Yeah, true that. And so they're saying the first wheeled vehicles are about 5,400 years ago, 5,402 to be specific.
Mm-hmm.
And so the famous cart ruts. What are the oldest cart ruts? Well, the oldest cart ruts are in an unpronounceable place, Misra Gar il Kabir,
I like how you throw in an accent there.
which is
random
informally
accent.
known as Clapham Junction. Isn't that weird? So it's a prehistoric site in Sigiwi. There it is, Sigiwi. It's the southern region of Malta. Isn't that a weird place to have cart tracks? These date back 5,800 years.
I'm back.
They date back 5,800 years, which puts them before the first wheel. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, that's funny.
These cart tracks are almost 6,000 years old. Now, we've seen them like this in Utah.
Yeah.
And so this is where it gets
Also, this looks a little like Sankawi.
Yeah, this is where it gets confusing because they cross and sometimes there's just a single track.
Yeah.
And sometimes the tracks aren't parallel. Like these, they start to converge.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are claiming that this is lost ancient technology. That's the main explanation. And I'm like, no, an eroded groove in a rock is far from lost ancient technology.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because in Sankawi, that's a different scenario. There aren't really cart ruts there, but there are human grooved paths from thousands of natives walking on the same spot. The tuff is so soft, if you just get your finger, you can erode it. You can scratch it with your fingernail. In this case, it's limestone. So this would take thousands of years or hundreds of years. In order to groove this limestone, something has to be grinding it. So I think you need a wheel here. Grinding the sediment at the spot, it makes a groove, and then you have to use the groove.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be more stuff. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about Sankawi. I mean, we spent a lot of time when we were at Sankawi talking about those grooves, which were generally single grooves, not parallel like this.
Yeah.
And that is the official explanation, that it's formed by people walking the same path over and over and over again. Except that so many of those grooves they're very smoothed out. They're also, some of them are extremely narrow for walking, and so we were hypothesizing that it was actually, again, water management, a way of directing water and collecting water.
Yeah, I would lean towards that indirectly happened. They first
that's what I was wondering.
They made the paths. It got too deep, and so we found areas where there's paths next to paths that are higher up.
Yes, yeah.
And that those became water management because when it rained, it flowed down the deep grooves they had made.
Right. I mean, it still could have been purposeful, like you could have just formed the tracks by doing the walking and softening that area, right?
Yeah. And the ones, remember at the top of the mesa, there were even ones that the grooves on the top of the mesa alluded to them collecting water and directing it towards their village.
Right, right.
Because remember, where we found these in Sankawi, it seldom rains.
Yeah. Right. You definitely need some kind of water management system if you're going to survive there. And granted, it's drier than it once was, but still.
Yeah, these cart ruts are not just in Malta. Like we said, they're all over the Southwest here, and they're all over the world.
Yeah.
And I think we need to let's do a deep dive into cart ruts, and we'll do a whole show on it.
Yeah.
And I want to organize maybe a trip for our fans to go out to White Sands and look at some of these footprints, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
If not, we could do a trip to look at the cart ruts.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to remember where they were.
Right, that's going to be the tricky part. By the way, that picture with the bicycle with the square wheels, I mean, again, to me, this is like so insulting because the insinuation of this picture, I think, is like, oh, we couldn't figure out how to make a bicycle because we didn't know how to make a wheel. So we're going to show a bicycle with square wheels. It's just, it's just so insulting.
Well, wheel technology went from a pottery wheel and just a few thousand years to spoked wheels. And then 800 BC were the first iron-rimmed Celtic chariot wheels. So the technology advanced to where it is today, thousands of years ago, and nothing has changed, which tells you that once you figure out what a wheel is, there's not much more you need to know.
No, clearly. And I don't think it takes that much figuring out either, like I've said.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure 20, 30, 40, maybe even 150,000 years ago, someone had a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Right. Right. Well, I think, especially as soon as you start using horses, I think the utility of a wheel becomes very obvious.
We're going to wrap up the show here in just a few minutes. Please support freedom of speech by supporting the #1 listener supported internet radio station, Revolution Radio. You can become a Patreon, give a one-time donation. They are a little shy of their monthly goal here, about $600 shy. They need $2,000 a month to operate. We've been with Revolution Radio for almost a decade. This is our second or third, I think it's our second radio show.
Second.
And yeah, they are just an amazing group. They don't censor, similar to Rumble, which is why we want you all to go over to Rumble and subscribe to Magnetic Reversal News, where this will be replayed tonight at 8 p.m.
Yeah, it's 8 p.m. Mountain Time. You will not find the show on YouTube because Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube got demonetized. So we are making the push over to Rumble, which is truly a free speech platform that we want to support anyhow.
And if you want a shirt like this, you just go over to our Rumble channel, Magnetic Reversal News, click shop. And this shirt is in our Sticker Mule shop. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And we also have a boom to knowledge shirt.
Yes.
Which a lot of people have been asking for.
It's a good shirt.
All right. So let's, the next show we're going to do on cart ruts.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to the bottom of this wheel. Anything, any final words?
I mean, I kind of feel like I said everything I wanted to say, so I guess not.
Yeah, and so we also have the Cerruti Mastodon site that we've talked about on the show. This might be human occupation in California dating 130,000 years ago.
Oh, I want to see that. Because
well,
again,
we can drive out there.
Yeah. I don't really want to be in California, but
yeah. Well, and mainstream science has been lying to us for decades. Dennis Stanford at the Smithsonian had known about artifacts that were older than the Clovis in the 1980s, and they weren't really allowed to discuss it.
Which I don't even understand why things get like that. Like, I get the problem with scientific paradigms and how hard they are to break, but like, why is it so controversial to discuss something that is different than the official scientific narrative because you don't want to rock the boat? Like I don't even understand what the motivation is at this point.
Well, back then they would say they're not supposed to be there.
Right. It's like, according to you? Yeah. Like, who says who? Anyway, find us again tonight on Magnetic Reversal News on Rumble at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific.
listening to Revolution Radio.